I titled today's Neville Goddard discussion, Mind Map, The Effortless Path to Miracles. Now, the premise of this conversation is actually a quote from The Law of One Material. Some of you might be familiar with this work, The Law of One Material, put together by L&L Research. And I was reflecting upon this quote right here because I believe it's very related to our conversation we had last Sunday, in which I shared two experiences with friends, in which I imagined them to be how they really are from the perspective of love. And what occurred on one pathway was it seemed they change a lot easier to reflect that which I imagine. And the other friend, I realized that I had certain thinking patterns in which I was identifying with and then bringing myself into different states of mind in which I wasn't able to, as a result of my own identification with thinking patterns, maintain a lighthearted conviction, or as Neville Goddard puts it, persistence in the assumption that they really are that way. And so what ended up happening was I reconciled within myself, and then from that reconciliation, which was my own thinking patterns, from the making peace within myself, they represented it to me in harmonious, healthy relationships. Now, if we look at our lives, we realize that this is a natural occurrence. Although we might not be consciously aware of how this works, we can practice this more so and make it a way of life. So let's look at this quote here. So it states, "There is the same difference between love, light, and light, love, as there is between teach, learning, and learn, teaching. Love light is the enabler, the power, the energy giver. Light love is the manifestation which occurs when light has been impressed with love." So we're taught all throughout our Neville Goddard discussions, throughout his lectures, in his book, to imagine from the perspective of love, because love is truly who we are. So we could say we are both love and light. And here we are in this world practicing the conscious use of the two gifts, speech and mind, imagination, to bring about the changes or expressions, we could say, of what we truly desire. Now, Neville states, the light is consciousness. Consciousness is one manifesting in legions of form or levels of consciousness. He says a man's consciousness is all that he thinks and desires and loves, all that he believes is true and consents to. This is why a change of consciousness is necessary before you can change your outer world. Now, we've been discussing this, and I've been encouraging this more so over the videos, to discover within yourself what you truly love. And feeling is the secret. And we're going to discuss this from a different perspective, the brain and heart coherence, in relation to some work from Dr. Joe Dispenza, which is the idea that what you truly love is something that you will truly commit to, and everything expresses effortlessly. Now, he says it a certain way, Neville. He says, the principle of least action governs everything in physics, from the path of a planet to the path of a pulse of light. Least action is the minimum of energy multiplied by the minimum of time. Therefore, in moving from your present state to the state desired, you must use the minimum of energy and take the shortest possible time. Your journey from one state of consciousness to another is a psychological one. So to make the journey, you must employ the psychological equivalent of least action. And the psychological equivalent is mere assumption. Now, if we bring ourselves back more into an alpha brainwave frequency, as we were talking about this in Thursday's video, it is easier for us to not only think accurately, but also discover within ourselves what we truly love, or we could say what we truly desire. And these are experiences that we genuinely want to have. For me, a large part of it was the entrepreneurial journey. Now, I'm going to share my experiences with you, and we're going to relate it to last Sunday's discussion. It was the same thing. For whatever the reason may be, I was identifying with certain doubt-based, indecision-based, fear-based thinking patterns in relation to moving forward with what I truly desired, which was back in 2009, to live the life that I've been living over the years since I took that step. And those thinking patterns were creating unnecessary friction. They were representations or messengers, we could say, of what was going on within my subconscious mind. And I'm not here to shame or blame or anything in regards to how that programming got in there, but rather to make peace with it. Now, I've realized this more so on the journey. That's why I value the journey and the destination. I value what within myself I desire from my heart, and I also honor it by committing to it in imagination, exactly like how he suggests. And I've talked to many individuals, and they do it in different ways. For me, I can speak it into a confirmation, a conviction in my imagination, and that's the way it is going to be, a commitment to it. That's because I find it's easier to imagine, think, and talk about what I love, and I encourage that in everyone. Now, if you're an artist, and I had mentioned in the last video, I believe we are all artists, or we are artistic in nature, then we understand that when we feel inspired to express in whatever it is, in our music, in our paintings, in our communication, in our entrepreneurial endeavors, when we genuinely feel like expressing, that is when we produce the best output, or we can accurately put the truth of who we are, because the way I like to look at it is that's actually a thumbprint of who we truly are. And our goal is to discover this more so within ourselves, is to be the light and the love at the same time. And the way to do this is to listen to your intuition, honor what you truly desire, commit to, imagine what you truly desire. You know what that is, what you truly love, and assume it as done. Now, the assume it as done is easier when we maintain a certain lighthearted way of being, which is why in the last video, I suggested the alpha state or the alpha brainwave state. Now, another state is the theta state. The theta state, which is more of a state akin to sleep, is a state of mind where we allow ourselves to be more suggestible. Now, one of the things I had mentioned was I like to imagine before going to sleep an inner dialogue with myself before going to sleep of all the attributes that I truly want to see within myself and express in everything that I do. In my environments, in my relationships, in my entrepreneurial endeavors, in everything. And it is easier for me to assume those ways of thinking, those thinking patterns, because it is a representative of the love. Now, I saw those individuals, my friends, although we were having conflicts in our relationship, from the perspective of how they truly are, which is also based on how you truly are. We all are, which is love. And we might not know the ways, the hows, and accurately we can assess what's going on within our own consciousness. That's why it is always suggested to make the change within. He has stated many times, leave this world alone and make the change within. Inner dialogue, or think internally to the point where we know that that is how it really is. And we do this by practice, being more conscious, and also understanding what is brought to the surface as a result of our day-to-day experience. Interpretations, that's the key. What are we saying I am to, both consciously and unconsciously? What we are, simply grab a sheet of paper or do it on your phone, take some notes. What are the interpretations we are giving to the individuals in the relationships that we desire? What are we saying about them to ourselves? Are we speaking truly from the perspective of love? Or are we speaking from the perspective of, let's say, condemnation, which is really self-condemnation being projected? Now, we want to make peace with these kinds of thinking patterns. He states, to rise in consciousness to the level of the thing desired, and to remain there until such level becomes your nature, is the way of all seeming miracles. And as we had stated, we use the principle of least action, which is your equivalent of mere assumption. I now recognize it really is that way, or that's the way it is. And as mentioned, what we truly represent, we go back to the quote here from the Law of One. It's interesting how they say there is the same difference. Now that seems on the surface perhaps a little contradictory, but when we go deeper into it, or more accurately put, when we reflect upon this more from alpha state, a flow state, we understand exactly that it is one. Same difference. It's the same thing happening at the same time. We identify with what we truly love in imagination, and it expresses itself. So what are the doubts, indecision, inaccurate thinking patterns that we are identifying with in relation to some of these statements? And we change those thinking patterns around, and we observe that things change. So for example, in my entrepreneurial journey, I really think about how the deals are going to show up. I really think about who I'm going to talk to, when I'm going to talk to. As a matter of fact, what I really do right now is really go by how I feel, which is, as stated, feeling is the secret. Now, he says it in an interesting way, a good perspective. He says, faith is feeling. According to your faith, and then he puts in brackets, feeling, be it unto you, Matthew 9:29. Now, you've heard me say this, we're always guided from within on the journey to realizing our vision. And we want to maintain that flow. And what really breaks that flow? I recommend watching my flow series. I'll put a link in the description to that. I call them flow breakers, but really it's our interpretation in regards to people, environment, circumstance, and information that seems to create the flow breaker experience. We want to discover these thinking patterns within ourselves and make peace with them. Such as perhaps, I don't truly deserve what I desire. That could be a thinking pattern. Well, perhaps then a person can benefit from some subconscious mind work, or engaging in self-talk, or recommend watching my video on Thursday, engaging in a conversation with yourself about how you are complete. We spoke about this. Completion being the foundation of relationships, and completion within. Because the reality is that we are complete. You can imagine anything, and you can commit to it in imagination to realize or we could say fuse light and love in imagination and commit to it, which brings about what he refers to as the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And then we maintain that feeling, that intuitive connection, and then we know what to do, what not to do, when to do, why to do, and we don't even have to think about those things. Now, this has been my experience more so as I've been practicing this. Now, we can go a little deeper to this, is that in a way, we're not really changing. What's really happening is we are allowing ourselves to be that which we truly want to be, committing to that in imagination, and then allowing the five sensory experience to rearrange or express accordingly. Our behaviors change, how we relate to others change, how they relate to us change. Things change, some way, somehow. And there was a while back where I used to work with this levels of consciousness that I had learned from David Hawkins, the scale of consciousness. And I found it to be very helpful. And what I find that I work with best now is simply, do I really feel like doing this thing? Whatever it is, I just go by the intuitive feeling. I don't doubt it. I don't question it. I don't argue with it. I allow myself to be connected to that intuition and then allow myself to express from it. And if I feel any disconnects with that intuition, I ask myself, what were my thinking patterns prior to whatever five sensory experience that I had that I called that a flow breaker? Because the cause is within, that which I consciously and unconsciously say I am too. So I find this thinking pattern and I make peace with it. I change how I relate to it. Now, this is something that we actually all do, and I'm emphasizing it and communicating it a certain way to further encourage it. See, if you have a conversation with someone, or you watch a video, or you read a book on any of these topics, you will discover distinct ways of thinking. There are infinity ways of looking at anything, any circumstance, any life experience, any reaction. In business, we could say any relationship, any resource, any asset. There are infinity ways of looking at these important aspects which play the role in connecting and combining them in interesting ways to create products, services, operational efficiency improvements, technological advancements, you name it. And a person might get too rigid on only seeing things from one or two or a few perspectives, rather than allowing themselves from within to express the true and accurate perspective, because they are so much identified with overthinking or certain thinking patterns. And it is experienced in their body language, their tension, the stress, how they relate to themselves, how they relate to others. It is important to not shame ourselves when we have these kinds of experiences, if we have these kinds of experiences, but rather pause for a moment, take a moment to reflect and say, what was my thinking pattern that I unconsciously, a lot of times it's unconscious, that I identified with prior to these experiences? And then make that change within. Assume to yourself, go a level higher to that I really can, say it to yourself, I really can find the distinct and accurate flow-based interpretation in regard to this event, which is true for me, and I assume it to be that way. And then feel yourself actually get back into the flow again. Now that's a form of deep acceptance. And that level of deep acceptance is something that we want to practice every day, and we can practice it through observation of reactivity. So release from the idea that if you get reactive, that you have a problem in the sense that you are not good enough. You are divine perfection and are on the journey of realizing your visions. I believe we're born to realize visions. And this is a day-to-day journey as far as I'm concerned, or as how I look at it, as a constant practice of the two gifts, conscious use of the two gifts, speech and mind. What am I saying to myself and that I'm committing to in imagination as a result of what we call reactivity or unconscious identification to certain five sensory experiences in which I form or encourage certain interpretations within. What are the thinking patterns? Except that I have identified with a thinking pattern, or that you have identified with a thinking pattern. Start with that acceptance and then say, what is the true, accurate thinking pattern? So we value ourselves, we allow ourselves to maintain that flow, and as a result of it, we know what to do. We listen to our heart and intuition. We allow things to be, and we enjoy life. We release from overthinking. And things start to change in ways that we know or in ways that we don't know. Sometimes I know. Sit down working on a certain marketing campaign or some kind of deal with a client, and they say, how do you set this all up? I'll know. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Or sometimes I'll say, you know what? Let's just take step 1. You resonate with that? Step 1. Because step 2 is going to reveal itself. And it does. It always does. Because we allow step 2 to be. So sometimes I know step 1, step 2, step 3, all the way till whatever step. That's perhaps my, you could say, engineering side or my logistics side, because I did IT technology and logistics for a number of years. But then there's also my side where I allow it to be. If I don't know, I don't need to stress myself about it. I simply need to remember that through the assumption that some way, somehow, it's going to happen, and allow it to be. So he says, get into the spirit of the state desired by assuming the feeling that would be yours were you already the one you want to be. So how do you assume yourself to be in regards to what we're talking about? A person that experiences the effortless path, flow-based path, more so every day, and experiences these what we call breakthroughs or radical changes or miracles in our lives more so every day. You are that person. Assume it a little bit more so every day and observe as these kinds of occurrences happen more so. And as a person perhaps identifies with reactivity-based interpretations to certain five sensory experience, do not shame ourselves, understand what that thinking pattern is, and value the purification of the mind, which is the spiritual alchemy process. I did a couple videos on that. I'll put a link in the description. Many ways of saying the same thing. Essentially what we're doing is we're reconciling within, making peace within, finding the true and accurate thinking within. Again, refer back to Thursday's video, the inner dialogues with yourself. You can find it within yourself. As a matter of fact, if you want to look at it from this perspective, anything that I ever say to you or anyone says to you, or any books or anything that you ever consume as far as information goes, you are the sole interpreter of, and you can allow your intuition to guide you to what is true and resonant. Perhaps some of these things I'm saying are resonant. Maybe a bunch of it is, maybe a bunch of it isn't. When I go through books and information, I have conversations with people. I don't condemn, because we're taught to release that kind of thinking patterns and allow ourselves to be resonant or remain in that feeling. And from there, we know what to do. We know what information is resonant. And so in entrepreneurship, we do the same thing. We get many different marketing strategies, sales strategies, ways of optimizing your business. And maybe a whole bunch of those things you don't have to do. Maybe you would do some of those things. The answer is it depends. Perhaps there's something to do right now and some things to do later. If you allow yourself to be more in that assumption that some way, somehow, I'm going to figure it out and I don't need to stress over this, I allow myself to be, then you'll know what it is. And a lot of times you'll automatically move forward with it, thus experiencing that autotelic way of being, as we had learned from Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Autotelic, a deep stage of flow. And so to emphasize this, he says, there's a definite feeling associated with every idea in the mind of man. So we want to encourage the ideas that maintain the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the flow, that which you truly are, which is a representation of love and light, and also, as a result of it, bring ourselves back into states of mind that are true to how we really want to be. And then what happens is we automatically, as a result of imagining others from the perspective of love, and what we truly desire, which is love, we automatically capture the feeling associated, as he says, with your realized wish by assuming the feeling that would be yours were you already in possession of the thing you desire. And your wish will objectify itself. It changes. People change, you change, environment change, results change, you get to your destination, and so forth. Now, an important distinction in regards to this is that would be yours were you already in possession. The reality is, in your mind, in imagination, you already are in possession with everything that you desire. I have a personal belief that I encourage. That which I love can never be taken away from me unless I have certain thinking patterns that I'm consciously or unconsciously identifying with, in which I am creating the illusion, and thus the bridge of incidence or theater, that it is taken away from me. So, in other words, I have the power to give myself and take away from myself, and I'll always move towards or imagine or think or talk about that which I truly desire, and so I'm already in possession of it. And the outer world is an expression of what goes on within. It's an artistic expression, a creative expression, innovation, we could look at it that way if you're an entrepreneur, of what's going on in our imagination, such as we discussed what Nikola Tesla used to do, which was go into his imagination and create an invention and imagine it to be a certain way, and he would build it a certain way in his imagination, and it would work exactly like how he imagined when he would express it, when they would create it. So that which we truly are, that which we love, the embodiment of light and love, which is an essence of what we represent, is only taken away based on our own thinking patterns, which plays out as the theater of that being taken away. And so let's simplify this feeling. Think feelingly. There was a video that I did. I'll put a link in the description to that. Think about things that really you feel, or imagine things that you truly do feel resonant with. And you continue to maintain the state of mind that's one with your vision, and also discover through the process of maintaining it even more nuanced feelings that imply certain things in your imagination. Think of an artist who creates a sculpture, for example, expresses, we can say, their imagination into a sculpture. Now, after that sculpture is complete, they feel like making another one. This time, however, they have some nuanced feelings as to how they're going to sculpt. And what is expressed is, you could say, even more vivid detail, or a more accurate representation of what is in their imagination in their art. The same is to be said about entrepreneurship, the same is to be said about relationships, the same is to be said about different areas of our life. Feeling is the secret. Commit to in our imagination, or commit to within, the feeling, and maintain that feeling by imagining more so every day that which implies and maintains that feeling in various shapes or form in different areas of your life, which is really to imagine lovingly in relation to yourself, in relation to others, in relation to environment, circumstance, information, and so forth. And as a result of it, you dwell in that feeling. And as a result of it, you have that coherence between heart and mind. And we'll talk about this more so in some of our discussions, in which we'll discuss Joe Dispenza's work. You honor what you truly love, and you do what is related. And actually, as a result of doing what is related in the entrepreneurial journey, you'll find a lot more of a flow-based, least action journey, principle of least action-based journey to the destination, because you won't engage as much in unnecessary, complex, force-based behaviors that add more stress and convolution on the entrepreneurial journey to realizing your vision. You experience more of that autotelic, or as we talked about in the Kabbalion discussion, stage of involution. And all we do is honor that feeling in order to be able to, and all flows, body flows, because body is an expression of mind, as a theatrical experience to realizing the vision. Simply put, we'll know what to do. We allow ourselves to do it. You automatically do it. And it goes back to the source. So let's read this quote again. He says, "The principle of least action governs everything in physics, from the path of a planet to the path of a pulse of light, least action is the minimum of energy multiplied by the minimum of time. Therefore, in moving from your present state to the state desired, you must use the minimum of energy and take the shortest possible time. Your journey from one state of consciousness to another is a psychological one. To make the journey, you must employ the psychological equivalent of least action. And the psychological equivalent is mere assumption. So assume yourself to be that person. Assume from the perspective of love, because that's who you truly are. And what you desire is yours. What you want is yours. Because those are representations of love, and the love is complete within, because we are complete in imagination. So we say, as we fuse mentally, as we say, I am too, or identify within imagination, it's done. And the outer world, we allow. That's the key word with the outer world. We allow the expression of love from within to externalize itself as what we desire, as what we saw in our imagination. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I recognize the same difference at the same time of love light, light love, allowing the expression of what I truly love as the effortless path to miracles. I find myself automatically honoring this more so as I listen to my heart and intuition, which guides the way to realizing my vision. I recognize that more so every day, it's easier for me, as it is natural for me, to allow what I love to be imagined as the vision realized. The light of consciousness allows me to find the true and accurate perspective in relation to all aspects on the journey to realizing my vision, thus allowing me to maintain my flow and effortless path to the realization of my vision. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.